Captain Helena Pierce sat at the head of the polished, oval table in the grand diplomatic hall aboard the USS Intrepid. The room, illuminated by soft, ambient lighting and glittering holographic projections, hummed with quiet conversations between the galaxy's brightest minds. Representatives from across the United Galactic Federation, species from planets her ancestors had only dreamed of, gathered for an historic summit on Earth's future and the galaxy. It was a monumental moment, one that was supposed to be filled with protocol, treaties, and harmonious diplomacy. But instead, everything came to a screeching halt. "Captain Pierce," a soft voice called from across the room. Xyrr'nak, the Pnark representative, stood with their large, elongated head tilted slightly in confusion. The alien's 3 bulbous eyes blinked rapidly, and their voice was as smooth as liquid, though there was a definite lack of emotion in the tone. "May I ask you a question about humans?" Helena sighed inwardly, resisting the temptation to roll her eyes. Xyrr'nak was by far the most inquisitive, some would say annoying, of the delegates. The Pnark had recently arrived from a system far beyond the galactic core. They were an intellectual species, fascinated by everything biological, yet emotionally distant. Xyrr'nak's curiosity was a double-edged sword, endearing, yes, but also borderline invasive at times. She'd become used to their endless questions about human customs, but nothing quite prepared her for what was coming. "Of course, Xyrr'nak," Helena replied, maintaining a professional smile. She gestured for the room to quiet down. "What's on your mind?" The room fell silent as Xyrr'nak's voice echoed with genuine curiosity. "Wait, humans reproduce like that?" They paused dramatically, as if processing something profoundly perplexing. Then, with a sudden shift in tone, they added, "Can I try too?" There was a collective intake of breath, followed by an awkward stillness that could only be described as shocked silence. Even the usually stoic delegates from the Xyrr'ai and Xylith species shifted uncomfortably. Helena's hand froze midair, where she had been reaching for her datapad. Her face flushed slightly, though she quickly composed herself, suppressing an impulse to laugh or shout. It was one of those moments that could break diplomatic decorum in an instant. "Xyrr'nak," she began, her voice measured but firm. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. That's not something we simply try." "Why not?" Xyrr'nak responded with utter sincerity. "I've reviewed many of your species' genetic documents. You reproduce by biological means, correct? It seems fascinating. Your species relies on physical connection, and your biological cycles are so intricate." They paused, looking around at the other delegates, seemingly unaware of the effect their words had caused. "Why must it be so complicated? Is there not an easier way?" Helena blinked twice, wondering how to respond to such a blunt, naive question. She glanced across the room to see the other ambassadors trying to stifle laughter or look away. It was the kind of question that was completely innocent, yet utterly inappropriate. Xyrr'nak had no concept of modesty, and certainly no understanding of the cultural significance of reproduction. To them, humans were just another biological anomaly to study, no more sacred than the mating rituals of their own species. "I'm afraid it's not that simple," Helena replied, struggling to keep her composure. "Human reproduction involves more than just biology. There are emotional, cultural, and personal aspects at play. It's not something we discuss casually." Xyrr'nak tilted their head again, clearly intrigued. "But why? Why is there emotion? Why do your species feel such things? It is illogical." The alien's confusion seemed genuine, like a child trying to make sense of the complexities of the universe. "Would not efficiency be more important than?" "Xyrr'nak," Helena interrupted, her voice growing firmer as she tried to steer the conversation back to safer waters. "Let's not derail the summit. We're here to discuss humanity's future in the Federation, not the intricacies of human biology." She offered a tight smile, glancing around the room to gauge the mood of the other delegates. She could see them shifting uneasily in their seats, but no one spoke up. Xyrr'nak, however, was not deterred. I have found your species' biological process to be fascinating. They continued, completely oblivious to the growing tension. I wish to understand more. Is it possible to observe this process? To study it firsthand? A murmur spread through the room. Helena could feel her pulse quicken, and her thoughts raced. This wasn't a simple diplomatic faux pas, this was bordering on a breach of intergalactic protocol. That's not something that can be observed, Xyrr'nak, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Human reproduction is deeply personal. It's not something we share with anyone, let alone for scientific study. But I do not understand, Xyrr'nak persisted. The concept of reproduction, of creating life, is so complex. Why keep it so hidden? Your species has such knowledge, and yet you keep it secret. How can we possibly understand your species if we cannot understand the process that defines your existence? Helena clenched her jaw, feeling the weight of her position. This wasn't just about one question. This was about how the Federation, and possibly the entire galaxy, would view Earth. If word got out that humanity was too sensitive or protective about basic biological processes, it could damage Earth's standing in the Federation. And if Xyrr'nak continued pushing the envelope on this issue, it might set a dangerous precedent. She took a deep breath, trying to find a diplomatic way to navigate the situation. Xyrr'nak, she said with as much patience as she could muster. Humans believe that life, and the creation of life, is sacred. It's not just a biological process, it's an emotional, personal experience. And for us, there is more than just efficiency in creating life. There is meaning, connection, and love. Xyrr'nak blinked once, twice, as they processed her words. Love. They seemed to ponder the concept, their three eyes narrowing slightly as if seeing a piece of a puzzle coming together. I see. It is something more than logic, then? Helena gave a short nod, thankful that the aliens seemed to grasp it, even if only partially. Yes, Xyrr'nak. It's more than logic. The room was quiet now, a delicate silence hanging in the air. Xyrr'nak looked around, their confusion softening. Thank you for explaining. I will not ask further questions, they said, their voice filled with a strange kind of respect. Helena nodded, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. I appreciate that, she said, her voice quieter now. Now, if we could get back to the agenda. As the room slowly returned to normal, Helena allowed herself a brief moment to collect her thoughts. This summit had already taken an unexpected turn. She couldn't help but wonder, if this was what it was like to represent humanity to the stars, then Earth had a long road ahead of it in the galactic community. But for now, she'd take the win, however awkward it had been. The days following Xyrr'nak's unsettling question were a mix of awkwardness and curiosity. Captain Helena Pierce had hoped the bizarre moment would be a one-off, an incident that would fade into the background of diplomatic history. But Xyrr'nak was not one to drop a subject easily. The Pnark ambassador's fascination with human biology had only deepened, and now, Helena found herself standing in front of a massive holographic display, trying to explain something far beyond the surface level of diplomacy. The summit was over for the day, but the real work was just beginning. Captain Pierce, Xyrr'nak's voice rang out in her quarters, an unusually bright and eager tone in their usually monotone speech. I have been reviewing more human documents, and I have more questions regarding reproduction. Can you explain why it is so emotional? The Pnark's large eyes blinked rapidly, showing a trace of excitement. Your species seems to attach a great deal of importance to the emotional aspects of reproduction. Why? Helena sighed, rubbing her temples. It was the 5th time that day Xyrr'nak had asked the same question, though framed in a new way each time. She had expected something like this. Xyrr'nak wasn't like any alien she'd met before. Their intellect was sharp, but their understanding of emotional depth was practically non-existent. I've already explained that it's part of being human, Xyrr'nak, Helena said, keeping her voice calm, though it had the faintest trace of fatigue. We don't just reproduce for survival. We reproduce to continue our species, sure, but it's much more than that. It's about love, connection, trust. But why? Xyrr'nak's voice held a genuine perplexity. Why should that matter? Surely logic would dictate that procreation is simply about ensuring the continuation of your species, not about feelings. Helena could feel the headache coming on. She turned to face the window, watching the stars flicker by as the USS Intrepid drifted silently through space. The ship had taken her to countless worlds, but today, she felt more distant than ever. Because Xyrr'nak, she started, her voice softening as she let the words flow. Humans are more than just biological entities. We are emotional beings. Our feelings drive everything we do, our relationships, our society, our actions. Reproduction, for us, isn't just about creating life. It's about creating meaning. Xyrr'nak seemed to mull over this, their three eyes narrowing slightly as they processed her words. Meaning, they repeated, as though the word was foreign to their tongue. But why does the process have to be so complicated? I have studied many species, and few have such elaborate customs. Helena closed her eyes, wishing she could explain it all at once. There was no easy answer, no simple explanation. You're right. It is complicated. But that's the thing, life itself is complicated. Our emotions, our desires, our connections to each other make us who we are. That's why we don't just reproduce for the sake of it. It's a process that bonds two people, shapes families, and forms the foundation of societies. Xyrr'nak seemed to chew on this, their posture shifting slightly as if adjusting to a new thought. They glanced at Helena, their voice dropping to a softer tone. I have seen humans interact in strange ways. You speak of love, but it seems to be a volatile force. Sometimes it brings people together, but other times, it drives them apart. How can something so powerful be trusted? Helena was taken aback by the question. For the first time, Xyrr'nak wasn't just asking about reproduction, they were questioning the very core of what made humans human. She shifted her stance, crossing her arms as she considered the response. Love isn't perfect, she began, choosing her words carefully. It's messy, unpredictable, and yes, sometimes it drives people apart. But it also builds the strongest bonds, the most meaningful connections. People fight, they disagree, they hurt each other, but in the end, love is what keeps them trying to rebuild. It's a force that can tear you apart, yes, but it's also the thing that makes you whole again. Xyrr'nak didn't speak for a long while, their eyes focused on her, absorbing the weight of her words. It was clear that they were grappling with concepts far beyond their own understanding. Helena realized, with a tinge of surprise, that they were trying to process not just human biology but the complexities of human emotion. You feel this love? Xyrr'nak asked finally, their voice almost tentative, as if testing the word on their tongue. Helena nodded. Yes, Xyrr'nak. We feel it deeply. And it shapes who we are, how we live, and what we become. It's not just a biological necessity, it's a choice. We choose to love, to connect, even when it's difficult. Xyrr'nak took another long pause, their large eyes blinking in rapid succession. I see. I have much to learn about your species. Perhaps more than I anticipated. Helena smiled faintly. You've barely scratched the surface, Xyrr'nak. And while it's easy to reduce things to simple logic, you'll find that humans are rarely simple. Before Xyrr'nak could reply, there was a sudden, soft chime. A message was incoming. Helena glanced at her console, noting the sender, Ambassador Solana from the Xylith delegation. She nodded, signaling Xyrr'nak that their conversation would need to pause. I need to take this, Xyrr'nak, Helena said, standing and turning towards the communication terminal. We'll continue this later, all right? Xyrr'nak didn't move, but their eyes lingered on her. Understood, Captain? I will continue my studies in the meantime. Helena offered a nod as the screen blinked to life, signaling the end of their conversation for now. As the new communication began, she felt the weight of her conversation with Xyrr'nak settle within her. It was strange, but it also felt oddly comforting. There was something deeply fulfilling about explaining humanity's complexities to someone so completely removed from it. In some ways, it reminded her of why she became an ambassador in the first place, to be understood, and to help others understand what made humans unique. As the conversation with Ambassador Solana took over, Helena couldn't shake the feeling that Xyrr'nak's question, their fascination with the emotional side of humanity, wasn't just academic. It was more. Something deeper, something more personal. But she wasn't sure yet if she was ready to confront it. For now, she would focus on what she knew best: diplomacy, the intricacies of intergalactic politics, and the delicate balance of representing Earth in a galaxy full of unknowns. But as she glanced back at Xyrr'nak, she realized that humanity's complexity might be the key to something greater than she could have anticipated. And perhaps Earth's true place in the stars was far more complicated than even she had imagined. Captain Helena Pierce sat at her desk, the soft hum of the USS Intrepid's engines a quiet backdrop to the flurry of thoughts racing through her mind. The last few days had been an emotional roller coaster, navigating the delicate balance between diplomacy, humanity's complexities, and an inquisitive alien species that seemed to have no concept of privacy or restraint. Xyrr'nak had been relentless in their pursuit of understanding the human condition. At first, it had seemed like a diplomatic oddity, a momentary distraction that could be easily brushed aside. But as the days passed, something shifted. What started as an awkward, almost humorous series of questions had deepened into something much more profound. Xyrr'nak wasn't just studying human reproduction anymore. They were now trying to understand humanity's entire emotional framework, its underpinnings, its essence. Helena couldn't help but feel a strange connection to the Pnark ambassador. It was as if Xyrr'nak, in their blunt, unemotional way, had opened a door to something she had never fully explored. Their questions about love, about relationships, about the bonds that formed human families, they were beginning to make her reflect on what it meant to be human. The soft ping of a message interrupted her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was from Xyrr'nak. The message read simply, "Can we meet to discuss further?" She smiled, shaking her head. There was no hiding from this. She had tried to brush it off before, but now, there was a sense of urgency to it. Something had shifted in their dynamic. She stood up, straightening her uniform, and moved to the meeting room. When she entered, Xyrr'nak was already there, their large, bulbous eyes watching her intently. There was no formal greeting, no pleasantries, just a directness that felt both refreshing and disconcerting. "Captain Pierce," Xyr'nak said, their voice strangely tentative. "I have been thinking, a lot. About your species. About you." Helena took a seat across from them, folding her hands. "I've been thinking about you too," she replied, her tone light. "I didn't expect this to go so far, Xyr'nak. You've asked questions no one has ever asked before." Xyr'nak tilted their head, the three eyes blinking slowly as they processed her words. "I did not realize how much I did not understand about your species until I began asking. It is overwhelming. You are all so connected. There is so much emotional energy in your interactions. It is something I cannot fully comprehend. It is not logical. It does not make sense." Helena paused, trying to gauge where they were going with this. "I never thought of it as illogical. To us, it's a part of who we are. Connection, love, family, it's how we survive, not just biologically, but emotionally. It's how we define our purpose." Xyr'nak blinked, then continued, their tone almost more introspective than usual. "And yet you also have conflict. I have seen your species torn apart by disagreements, by hatred, by loss. How can something so destructive arise from something so profound?" Helena's gaze softened as she leaned back in her chair, staring out at the distant stars beyond the window. "Because we're human," she said simply. "We're not perfect. We make mistakes. We hurt each other, and sometimes, we don't know how to fix it. But even in that pain, we continue to move forward, because, at the end of the day, it's the connections that matter. Love, though messy and complicated, is what keeps us trying." Xyrr'nak processed her words silently. Then, after a long pause, they spoke again, their voice quieter than usual. I do not understand how you do it. How you continue despite the pain. I have seen your species suffer, and yet you continue. Why? I do not believe your emotional capacity is a weakness. I simply do not understand it. Helena's lips twitched upward slightly. Maybe that's the point, Xyrr'nak. We don't have all the answers. But we keep going because we believe it's worth it. We believe in the possibility of something better. Maybe that's where we differ. You view the world through logic and reason, but we see it through possibility, through what we hope things can be, not just what they are. Xyrr'nak stared at her, silent for a moment. Then, with a rare hint of something like curiosity, they asked, Do you think this is what makes your species special? Helena considered the question carefully. I think it's what makes us human. We're flawed, imperfect, and often our own worst enemies. But it's in that imperfection that we find our greatest strengths. We fight for what we love. We fight for those we care about, even when it seems impossible. It's what keeps us alive. Xyrr'nak was still for a long time, their three eyes unfocused as they looked at something far beyond the room. Then they spoke again, voice quieter than before. Perhaps there is more to your species than I thought. I cannot deny what I have seen. Your emotional capacity is unique. And it is not as illogical as I once believed. Helena nodded slowly, a sense of accomplishment filling her chest. That's the first step, Xyrr'nak. Understanding. The alien's posture shifted, almost as if they were contemplating something deeper, something more personal. And do you believe humans can teach us about this? About connection? Helena leaned forward, meeting their gaze directly. I think we can learn from each other. There's a lot about humanity that others won't understand until they experience it. Maybe the same goes for you. Your species has its own strengths, your intellect, your resilience in the face of adversity. We all have something to offer. Xyrr'nak's eyes flickered with something like acceptance. Then, perhaps this is the beginning of a new understanding. A new path forward, where logic and emotion can exist together. I appreciate your patience, Captain. And your willingness to explain. Helena stood, offering a smile. I'm glad you're starting to see it. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to help us understand things we've overlooked. As Xyrr'nak left, the air in the room felt charged with the potential for something new, something more than just a simple diplomatic exchange. It wasn't just about the questions or the answers anymore. It was about the possibility of bridging the vast, emotional gap between species. And in that moment, Captain Helena Pierce realized that maybe, just maybe, humanity's greatest strength wasn't its intelligence or its technological advancement, but its capacity to feel, to connect, and to keep trying, no matter the cost. She smiled to herself as she watched Xyrr'nak disappear into the hallway. This was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, but perhaps, through understanding, humanity could find its place among the stars, not just as a species of survivors, but as a species of possibility.